guys, welcome back. This is virtual week 2 of Learning with Miss Jones. I just wanted to say thank you to all of those that have participated last week in the video discussion, and also I have read your comments and hope to provide you with some good information over the next couple of weeks. By the way, the average amount of times that a person touches their face in an hour is 23. Today I want to start you off with a story about a guy named Edward Jenner. Now, he's very fascinating and very intriguing, and I hope you enjoy. Back in May of 1796, Jenner was in medical school, and he heard this theory. I'm a milkmaid, and since I've already gotten cowpox, there is no way I'm going to get smallpox. When Edward Jenner heard that, he said, maybe we should try this out. So on May 14th of 1796, Jenner decided to take some pus from the scabs of somebody with cowpox and insert them into an 8-year-old boy. He scratched it into the skin of this 8-year-old. We'll call him James. As you would think, James developed a very mild case of cowpox. But to put this on perspective, cowpox is not nearly as dangerous as smallpox. Most people survive from it. So James developed a mild case of cowpox, but in a couple of days he recovered. So then, on July 1st of the same year, Jenner said, it's time to put smallpox into this boy as well. Of course, this was very dangerous and probably not ethical, but it's 1796, so times are a lot different. We call this process inoculation, when you take parts of one and put it into the other, just to see if we can fight off the disease. Fortunately, James was unharmed during the process. He never developed smallpox. And that's simply how vaccines were introduced, by the works of Edward Jenner. Or so you thought. Have you ever heard of all the pox diseases before? I mean, there's sheep pox, rabbit pox, monkey pox, horse pox, goat pox, swine pox, cow pox, pseudo-cowpox, smallpox. The list goes on and on. I feel like Bubba from Forrest Gump. Before Jenner tested out this theory, there was somebody by the name of Lady Mary Montagu. And she has an incredible story to tell. She was a rebel. She was a part of English royalty, and she didn't like to listen to any instructions that were given to her. She did what she wanted to. During the 18th century, smallpox was the deadliest disease in the world. It killed a lot of people. Usually 1 out of 4 were killed by smallpox. It eventually wiped out more people than the Black Plague. In December of 1715, Lady Montagu came down with smallpox, and it left her skin very scarred. In fact, all the skin around her eyes would remain red and irritated for the rest of her life, and she lived well into her 70s. Her and her family traveled to Turkey in 1717, and there she started to write a bunch of letters. You should read them sometime, they're very interesting. She noticed that smallpox was harmless in Turkey. Everybody's skin was beautiful, and she wondered, how is this happening? Upon further investigation, she realized that these old women were coming to these parties, 15, 20 some people at a time, and they had a nutshell full of the best smallpox you could possibly get your hands on. Not that you want to. They would ask you, what vein do you want us to open? Once you told them, they would put the smallpox into your vein. Then they would bind it up with a little piece of shell that they had left over. That's it. Of course, that seems very dangerous, but we're just putting a little amount into your body. So how dangerous can it actually be? Upon learning that her and her husband had to go back to England, where there was a huge outbreak of smallpox at the time, she decided secretly that this needed to be performed on her 3-year-old son. He was the first known Englishman to have undergone an inoculation of smallpox. He never got the disease. So of course she wanted to tell everybody about this wonderful discovery, but they didn't want to hear it. There were religious reasons and medical reasons, on top of economic reasons, and then of course the one I always roll my eyes at. What do females know? So she said, watch this. Let's have people come and see what's going on and what's taking place. She decided to have her second child inoculated and had an audience come over to watch what was taking place. All of her friends started asking her, man, can I have this done to my family too? Can I have this done to my kids? Some said yes, but still some family members decided to say no. That's not happening unless tests are going to be performed on other people before it's put into my family. So the king ordered that 6 prisoners be tested with it, 3 males and 3 females. No issues. And then with another audience, they performed it on 11 different London orphans. And these were considered Europe's first clinical trials. So all these families that said no eventually said yes to their granddaughters only. They didn't want to risk the male bloodline. But then the practice started to spread all over. But of course, Jenner's experiments went more viral. Get it? Viral? Haha! Here's a little background info on smallpox. The first infection dates actually came about 12,000 years ago through manuscripts and this and that documenting what smallpox could have been like back then. It was well known that once you contract it, you were not going to contract it again. The most effective treatment of it was inoculation. And that's when you took the pus from somebody who's infected of a smallpox scab and you were to scratch it and put it into the person's nose or skin or whatever else. That way they're being exposed to a very small amount and hopefully have good results. With that inoculation method, you should only have some sort of mild infection of smallpox. Some people did die from the inoculation procedure. However, it was at a much lower rate than if they would have contracted it naturally. In Europe alone, around 400,000 people would die annually from it. In the 20th century, it was estimated that 300 million people died from smallpox. That's a huge number. So in 1967, the WHO launched a global campaign to get rid of smallpox once and for all. And that year, there were 10 to 15 million cases of smallpox and 2 million people died. That sounds a lot worse than our flu and the coronavirus right now. A decade later, 1977, that number was down to 0! And on May 8, 1980, smallpox was declared eradicated. Now for an ethical question. There are 2 places you can still find smallpox. One's in Atlanta and one is in Moscow. They're in guarded laboratories, but should we have them at all? The last thing I want to talk to you today is about zoonosis. Now, as you may or may not know, there are some pathogens that are specific to some species, and they don't cross that species line. There are some that are specific to birds, to pigs, and to humans. But when pathogens cross those species barriers, we have problems, and we call this zoonosis. For example, there's the bubonic plague, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme disease, both of which are caused by ticks, bird flu, swine flu. Anybody remember the swine flu back in 2009? The West Nile virus and Zika virus, both of those caused by mosquitoes. This is relevant right now because we still don't know where the coronavirus came from. They first said it came from snakes. Then they said it came from snakes that ate these infected bats. And people were eating these snakes. Ugh. Then they said some other sort of crazy exotic animal I've never heard of in my life before. And now they're saying they don't know. It could take us years to figure out the source of this coronavirus outbreak. In 1999, there was a case of a disease that was transmitted on these pig farms. These pig farms were very close to bat populations that had been exposed to a virus. So the bats poop or whatever else, it gets in the pigs and the pigs eat that mush. And then we eat those pigs. Have you seen Contagion? So tying this all in together, the efforts of Lady Montagu and Edward Jenner are seriously appreciated. We have to realize that this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. They weren't the first ones to actually discover it. They just wanted to tell their findings to the world. Of course, Jenner's method made the practice more widespread. His method was also a lot safer since cowpox is far less virulent than smallpox is. That way, people aren't being exposed to such a deadly disease. And that's how we got the word vaccine. Vacca comes from the Latin word for cow. So, vaccine. He did put a coin on that one. So Jenner is said to be the first person to use humans as test subjects. I mean, he didn't perform any clinical trials by no means whatsoever, on animals and then on humans. Can you imagine if we did that stuff today? But then again, we're stuck in this coronavirus outbreak. We need quick results. So there's a lot of ethical questions that take place right now. Do we wait on animal trials and human trials? Or do we jump right into it so all of this can end? I'll leave you with this quote by Francis Galton that says, "In science, the credit goes to the man who convinces the world, not to the man to whom the idea first occurs." I hope that changes one day. Till next week, guys. Switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk to you guys about another disease called polio. What's interesting about polio is that the infected person does not show readily available symptoms. Doesn't that sound familiar? Now there are 3 strains of polio. And in order for it to be declared fully eradicated, we have to make sure that all 3 strains are not present for 3 years. Type 2 and Type 3 have already been declared eradicated. We're still waiting on Type 1, and unfortunately the efforts to eradicate it completely right now have been put to a halt because of the COVID-19 outbreak. Epidemiology, what a very interesting thing to study. That's when you look at the distribution, the pattern, and the causes of the diseases. People who study epidemiology try to monitor the situation by looking at what regions were impacted, determine what caused the outbreak to take place, and they also plan and evaluate vaccination programs. This is where I think I should have switched my major to epidemiology or public health. There was a global effort in 1988 established by the WHO and UNICEF to fully eradicate polio if possible. There were still a small number of polio cases around the world, in some places that were not able to receive vaccines, or the vaccine programs didn't work out so well. They looked at cases in India over a 7-year period and noticed that there were 2 years where they had spikes. So they looked at the geographic distribution of it to try to pinpoint an area and then go determine why that took place. By 2012, India was declared polio-free. Of course, a concern is that polio-free countries could develop polio again by people crossing borders. Doesn't that also sound familiar right now?